Can the European Union depend on the UK? That's one of the central questions to our conversation with Nick Thomas-Symonds this week, the UK minister who is responsible on the British side for this so-called UK-EU reset. We talk about many things, including how Europe and the UK should respond to the US threats towards Greenland.
NATO is the foundation stone. The future of Greenland is a matter for the people of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark.
We also ask what would happen if Europe had to defend Ukraine without support from the US.
The coalition of the willing is hugely important.
How do you build relationships across Europe amid the rise of increasingly controversial political leaders?
We will work with whoever our allies select as and choose as their leaders.
And how do you keep political agreements with this constantly shifting political landscape?
If you are conducting and delivering international agreements, as we are, that produce material benefits on both sides, then logic would tell you that they become very hard to unpick by subsequent governments.
I'm Dominic Kramer, and this is The Europeans. Stay tuned for an insightful conversation with Nick Thomas-Symonds, the minister responsible on the UK side for the UK-EU reset. Nick Thomas-Symonds, thank you for joining us today on The Europeans.
Absolute pleasure.
I'd like to start by talking a bit about the British economy, which I think it's fair to say has struggled in recent years with weak growth and productivity compared to many of its peers. To what extent do you think Brexit has contributed to these difficulties?
Well, look, firstly, it's very good to be joining you. And we've never hid from the fact that we had a very tough economic inheritance. I think we inherited a situation where you're absolutely right. There had been significant long-term issues with productivity. We had public services on their knees in a real sense going around the country, as I was in 2024, that things just didn't work anymore. And I think you're absolutely right to highlight the previous government's handling of Brexit, and particularly the trade and cooperation agreement that we inherited. And then we got that mandate to improve the relationship in the 2024 general election. We said we wouldn't rejoin the single market or customs union or go back to freedom of movement. But we did set out that we would be building that closer relationship. I have to say I've been extremely pleased with progress, a very close, constructive relationship with my EU counterpart, Maroš Šefčovič. And indeed, across Europe, the reset is visible in terms of that much more positive relationship. Only last week, I was in Paris for a very productive discussion with my counterpart there, Benjamin Haddad, discussing a range of issues in the UK-EU reset and many other areas, including security and energy, that in my view are absolutely critical, both the EU and the UK.
You've talked about now being the time for ruthless pragmatism when it comes to UK-EU relations. What does ruthless actually mean here? I mean, being ruthless implies, to me at least, that someone's going to feel some pain as a result of this strategy. Who exactly do you envisage as feeling that pain?
It certainly isn't designed to produce pain. What it's designed to do is to produce advantages, material advantages for people, from security in terms of our European continent-wide security, benefits in terms of safety of our citizens. So we are working together in criminal justice matters and tackling irregular migration so that criminals, from vile people smugglers to others who work across borders, have nowhere on our continent to hide, but also prosperity, which is going to be absolutely crucial right across Europe. But the reason I used that phrase is because I'm somebody who, over the 11 years I've been a member of Parliament, has been right through the different aspects of the Brexit debate. And for too long, I saw it as one that was being dominated by ideology over what was in people's interests. So that's why I use the term ruthless pragmatism, moving away from that to an absolute focus and decisiveness about what is the best outcome for people on either side of the channel that isn't related to some preconceived ideological idea. And that's exactly the approach I've taken that delivered the common understanding back in May of last year, and that delivered just before Christmas, which I'm very proud of, which is the reaccession of the United Kingdom to Erasmus+, which I think will produce benefits for thousands of people, both here in the United Kingdom, but across Europe as well. But also the opening of talks on electricity trading, which is going to be critical both for energy security and one of the tools we can use to bear down on energy prices too.
Things like the Erasmus thing coming back are nice. You're not going to see that much opposition to it. But when people hear talk of a reset in UK-EU relations, some are skeptical that that is going to amount to anything more than warm words and a handful of nice symbolic things, such as cooperation on, indeed, student exchanges. What would you say to somebody who thinks that this reset is deliberately modest because you're worried about getting domestic political backlash from voters who were pro-Brexit?
No, it's about delivering on our manifesto. And just the only thing I would just challenge slightly in your question is that Erasmus Plus isn't only a student exchange program. It's often understood that way, but it is far more than that. It's also about vocational exchanges, sports exchanges, people looking at professional development, and indeed older students as well. There is a real breadth and range to Erasmus+. But to your central point, again, I would challenge the idea that this is simply a modest reset. The agreement, the SPS agreement, the food and drink agreement is going to be worth billions of pounds to the economy, but also the work that we are going to be doing on electricity trading, but also the emissions trading system linkage, which will have that exemption from the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will mean British businesses will be able to save hundreds of millions of pounds in carbon taxes they would otherwise have had to pay. And my challenge to anyone who wants to argue against the work I'm doing is that do they really want to take away additional sharing, additional tools that make people in this country safer? Do they want to take away the security and defence partnership at this critical moment in international politics? And do they want to say to businesses up and down the country, you are going to have to pay these costs again? Do they want to actually say to people, whether it's energy bills or whether it is in the price of the weekly shop, they want to risk those things going up? Because that is the dividing line between the approach that we are taking and those who oppose it.
Do you feel like the mood of the British public is shifting in a way that gives you more or less room for manoeuvre when it comes to collaborating with the EU?
Well, I actually think that the mood of the British public is very close to the approach that we've been taking. And I've discovered that not only campaigning in the 2024 general election, but also when I've been approached. I mean, if you think just before Christmas, when we made the announcement the week before about Erasmus+, what I got was a real sense of positivity about that. So I think there is a real public appetite for the closer UK-EU relationship we're trying to build. But I also get a sense that people want to look forward. They don't want to go back to the battles of the past. And that's precisely the approach the government takes.
In the current geopolitical climate, defence and security cooperation seem to matter more than ever. Do you think the UK should be seeking a more structured role in EU defence initiatives, or do you see NATO as the primary framework, even as one NATO member is threatening another NATO member?
Well, look, NATO is the foundation stone, but with regard to the issue you quite rightly raised around Greenland, the Prime Minister has been unequivocal about that in a press conference only a few hours before we are speaking on this podcast, that the future of Greenland is a matter for the people of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark, and has set out that the use of tariffs is completely wrong. So we've been unequivocal in our position on that. But in terms of the broader point about European security, security is in Europe a continent-wide challenge. Whether you are an EU member state or whether you are not, that challenge exists for us. And it exists for us because of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine back in February 2022. We have a return. I never thought necessarily I would see it in my lifetime of a return to land war in Europe. And again, the coalition of the willing is hugely important. Whether you see the E3 in terms of Germany, France and the United Kingdom, or indeed the wider diplomatic work that the Prime Minister conducts on behalf of the United Kingdom, you don't need to take my word for it that there's been a reset. You only need to see the close cooperation between them and the relationship, the warm, constructive relationship that exists between the Prime Minister and other European leaders to see that in action.
We're speaking on Monday, and I indeed just watched the speech that Prime Minister Keir Starmer gave, and it seems very clear that your government is still maintaining a policy of careful cooperation with the Trump administration. What do you say to critics who argue that it is naive to expect the Trump White House to really have the UK's back, and that in these times the UK should be sticking much closer to what is actually its biggest trading partner and a much more stable political actor, the European Union?
Well, we don't choose between our allies. Winston Churchill did not choose between allies. Clement Attlee did not choose between allies in the post-war period. And that calm, measured engagement is what is in our national interest. That's precisely what the Prime Minister is doing. This is obviously a critical moment for international security and European security with the situation as we have it with Putin's illegal invasion in Ukraine. But also, words on the international stage matter. Jobs and livelihoods are vital in terms of the approach that we take to diplomatic work. And it's the Prime Minister who is leading that work. And it's that's in the forefront of his mind as he does so.
You are widely seen as one of Keir Starmer's closest political allies. From where you sit, what is the mood actually like inside number 10 Downing Street right now? I mean, Labour is polling around the mid-teens behind Reform, the Conservatives, in some polls even behind the Greens. That seems to be a serious political problem.
Well, the message that we pick up on the doorstep is very much about change and a real desire for change. Look, that was the word that was on the side of our campaign bus. I know I was on it for several days in the 2024 general election. So what I think you will find, and I do find because I speak to you from the Cabinet Office, which is literally next door to where the Prime Minister and his team work, is an absolute determination to deliver that change, to remove any barriers that exist to delivering that change. And the Prime Minister has said that 2026 will be the year when we start to turn that corner. And if you just think about some of the measures that we've already taken that will come into effect this year, the £150 off people's energy bills, the abolition of the 2-child limit so that families up and down the country with more children will be able to access that support. And that, by the way, is a real investment in children's futures. So it's a determination to deliver that you'll find right across the government and indeed being led by number 10.
Isn't it a bit of a problem that EU leaders look at these polls in the UK as well? Like, why would they take long-term UK commitments seriously if the UK government itself looks politically fragile with reform on the rise?
If you are conducting and delivering international agreements, as we are, that produce material benefits on both sides, then logic would tell you that they become very hard to unpick by subsequent governments. And that is why it is so vital now we do move towards, as we are, implementation to deliver that tangible change.
As you say, what's happening in politics in the UK is something that's being mirrored in many ways across the continent in terms of the rise of the far right. If the European Union was to move in that direction politically, with even stronger influence from parties led by figures like Jordan Bardella or Giorgia Meloni, how would that affect your vision of what closer UK-EU cooperation will look like in the years to come?
Well, firstly, in relation to Prime Minister Maloney, who I've met actually on more than one occasion, the Prime Minister's met her on several occasions. We work very well with Prime Minister Maloney and her government in Italy. But more broadly, look, it is a matter for democracies who they choose as their leaders. It's not for us to choose the leaders of different democracies. It's up to them. We will work with whoever our allies select as and choose as their leaders. And these are deep historic relationships that go beyond whoever happens to be the Prime Minister here or indeed the leader of other countries. These are very deep, lasting relationships, and I'm sure they will continue to be long into the future.
One final question before we let you go. You talked about having a good relationship with Giorgia Meloni, and I wanted to know which other political leaders or figures within the EU do you find it easiest to work with, and how much do these personal relationships still matter in international diplomacy?
They hugely matter. And of course, my main relationship is with Commissioner Šefčovič, because he is the one that I negotiate with on a regular basis. We are taken to sharing the odd drink together. He is more in the Slovakian red wine territory. I'm much more in the whiskey territory. I've particularly been persuading him of late into Welsh whiskey. And I do think that relationship really matters. And of course, it doesn't mean that we don't really push, he the interests of the EU, me the interests of the United Kingdom. Of course we do, and you would expect us to both do that in a robust way. But the constructive, friendly relationship we have, I think, really does make a difference to our ability to get things done.
This is a question we should ask all political guests, Dominic. Do you stick to national priorities and national exports when having drinks with European counterparts? Nick Thomas Simmons, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure.